Dave, thank you so much, man. I greatly appreciate it. It's been a hectic time us getting together. So
that's owed mostly. I'll put it at like 75% my own flakiness, and then Southern California traffic.
It's Southern California traffic. It's amazing. I'm just mind-boggled by just the volume, and it doesn't matter what time of day. It's always.
It's unpredictable. That's the killer of it. And people will say, well, you have to anticipate for that and you have to account for that before you get into the car. But what kind of life would you be carving out for yourself if you always assume that what takes you, 7 out of 8 times takes you 30 minutes to do, if every once in a while it takes you more like an hour, and then once in a blue moon it takes you 2.5 hours, which is what it literally just took me to get from my place to here. 2.5 hours. I mean, what kind of life would I be living? Should I be leaving the house 2.5 hours early in case there's traffic? That's no way to live.
No way.
But anyway, yes.
No. Well, thank you for making the effort. I greatly appreciate it. And
what a pleasure.
We're here at the Sage Plant Based Bistro, vegan place, vegetarian, whatever.
It feels, I mean, it really, you couldn't pick a more sort of stereotypical place, at least according to Woody Allen in Annie Hall. I think all the negative stereotypes that exist about Los Angeles are largely owed to Woody Allen and Annie Hall. That one scene, or his time when he comes out to LA to visit her, it's all about, like, what do people eat out there? Don't they eat normal food? You'll never find better burgers than you'll find in Los Angeles, but everybody assumes it's all sushi and plants. So I guess this place is perpetuating that. Good, because real estate's already expensive enough. Yeah. Don't come out here.
Well, I can tell you, though, that this is obviously stereotypical of California, but it's not stereotypical of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
No, indeed.
Right?
No, quite opposite, yes.
So I'm just amazed, the transition for you to come to California from Pittsburgh. I mean, that's the quintessential blue-collar type of town, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the steel town. Have you made the transition enough where you're now a true Californian?
Well, it is very hard to imagine. They always say give LA a year or two to really adjust to it, because it really is. I lived in Pittsburgh for my first 18 years, and then after college, I lived in Chicago for the better part of a decade. And Chicago and Pittsburgh and Boston and Cleveland and
you can kind of connect the dots with those.
Those places have a lot more in common with each other than any of them do with Los Angeles. This is a completely different, exotic land. It feels like I always remember watching in Pittsburgh round about late November, early December, when you're flipping around and the weather gets the steel gray skies and you're watching college football and you go from Penn State to Ohio State, Michigan, and you're flipping around, and then later in the afternoon on comes, where is this game being played, where it's sunny and warm clearly, and both of the teams are wearing their home jerseys, UCLA and USC. What is this exotic land? Oh, this is in America? Yeah. This is the same place?
I didn't think this place existed, right?
It really is. It's a trip, but yeah, now it's kind of hard for me to imagine going back to that. It would be hard to think about, half my life will be spent in the cold. I really have legitimately gone soft.
Yeah, so you couldn't do cold again.
I mean, listen, yes, I'll do a lot of things to make some money, so let's never say never. But yes, my inclination would be to stay in this weather.
So let's walk back then, what you were describing, those Saturday afternoons when you're watching Penn State, Pitt play in football. What was life like growing up in Pittsburgh in the Dameshek family?
When I think about it, it really is my memory, outside of family and watching cartoons on Saturday mornings and a few other little items. It was just all sports for me. When the lights first came on for me and I became lucid about what was going on outside my immediate world. The Steelers were the best team in football. The Pirates won the World Series. Pitt was really good at football, and the Penguins weren't good. But for the most part, the City of Champions moniker was well earned at that point. That was the height of it. If you remember,
it fit very well for that moniker.
You're probably too young to remember, but Sports Illustrated cover with Willie Stargell and Terry Bradshaw back to back, and it said City of Champions on it. That was what you assumed was, well, that's what it is. We live in the city of champions. And my father was a doctor. He was the general practitioner for Pitt football, Pitt basketball, and for the Penguins. And so, I went to,
you were at all the events.
I mean, from probably about 1980 to 1988, I didn't miss a Pitt football game at home. Went to some on the road. Always was at Penguins games. Season tickets to the Steelers. I remember, like I say, when the Steelers won that Super Bowl 14 and then Super Bowl 13, I went to the playoff games with my old man and my uncles and my sister Amy, and it was so cold. One of my earliest memories really is it was so bitterly cold in that late January that we had gloves on, my sister and I, but we took hot chocolate and we were pouring it straight onto our hands. I don't think that would be advisable
no,
to a doctor,
not.
but that's what we did. But yeah, I mean, my whole life was just rooting on the local teams and going to the games and everything else, and that's all I knew. And on the other side of that, in the 80s, all of a sudden things turned. All of a sudden Terry Bradshaw got hurt and Mean Joe retired and the Steelers became mediocre and the Pirates weren't very good in the 80s. And all of a sudden I suddenly, so my complicated sense of self-esteem is owed to like, oh yeah, this is the way it always is. We're the best there is. Wait, we're not the best?
Wait a second, yes.
I've been bait and switched. I've been bait and switched by the sports gods. Now I'm distrustful of life.
So where was your allegiance? Pitt or Penn State? Because I know in that area you had to choose one.
That's exactly right. Yes, and we remain a Pitt house long after Joe has come and gone from the sports scene. We were dyed-in-the-wool Pitt people. It was never up for debate. That's how it was.
Nothing.
No one in the house, no one in the extended family, no one rooted for Penn State. And I find it grotesque that people in Pittsburgh continue to root for Penn State when they have the University of Pittsburgh right in their backyard.
No, what about from the professional side? You mentioned City of Champions, how Pittsburgh, especially the Steelers back in the day. I do remember that because I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
exactly.
you got yours in 30. You know Larry Brown. You know what Larry Brown did
That's
to Neil
right.
O'Donnell
We
twice.
finally got one.
Yeah.
But we also have that moniker, America's team.
Yeah.
But at the time, when I was growing up in those 70s as well, again, the Steelers owned the Cowboys. So did that piss you off that how did the Cowboys get that,
well, first of all,
that label, America's team? Why isn't it Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. How fraudulent that the Cowboys decided, yeah, we'll be America's team, and then they just own it forever.
Yes.
They just own it forever. I have submitted that it should be an annual award. I said a couple of years ago that it should be the Philadelphia Eagles. Who couldn't love the story of Chris Long and Malcolm Jenkins and Long putting his arm around Malcolm Jenkins while he raised a fist, and people said, well, that doesn't belong on the football field. That'll disrupt and distract from what you're trying to do on the field. Au contraire, they won the Super Bowl, so I thought that was great. And now it seems like the Cleveland Browns are going to be America's team. We'll see
I think that's a stretch.
Well, people have anointed them.
They have
a Super Bowl contender.
I'm not buying into it.
Let's win double digits, and then I will consider them as a Super Bowl contender until they actually do something besides put a nice little string of games together. Then I will remain on the skeptical side. But I mean, it's funny. I'm gonna here comes a big name drop, a big one now. Paul Rudd. I was talking to Paul Rudd at the Super Bowl.
It is a big name drop.
On the night.
I like that.
Well, it's not like he would know who I am, but I was talking to him on the red carpet of NFL Honors when they hand out all the awards the eve of the Super Bowl, and he's a Chiefs fan, and I think that's fairly well known. But he mentioned he's a Steelers fan, so I started quizzing him on it, and he really knows his Steelers stuff. And he mentioned, being in the ballpark of my age. He said exactly what I've said many times before. No matter who your local rooting interest was, you had that team, but then you also were required to choose either the Steelers or the Cowboys. That was just the way it was. They were the two dominant teams. They were the two titans in pro football before the actual Titans kind of took the shine off of that moniker. But yeah, I always say, you either went for the shiny glitz and the stunt at the offensive line and the shotgun and star-hatted Cowboys and you vibed to that, or you went for the brawn and the might and the grit of Pittsburgh Steelers football. Which side you fell on said everything about you.
Well, there's something about it.
If you're from Dallas, I'll allow it.
Well, I'm not, and that's the thing. But I was impressionable as an 8-year-old. You see that star, like, I like the shine. I like the glitz.
See, I didn't swoon for it. I like the.
Well, you're from Pittsburgh, though.
Well, that's
you're
true.
that grit. You're that grind type of guy.
I guess. I wonder what that would be interesting if you dropped me in between the two towns. Which team I would have vibed for? I don't know.
Yeah, I grew up in a suburb of Atlanta, so we had the Falcons, and we didn't have a lot to cheer about.
I remember what I remember well is after Roger Staubach retired, Danny White took over for him, and he went in and beat the mighty Atlanta Falcons, the Grits Blitz and all that. Steve Gronkowski, they were a really good team, and they hosted the Cowboys. And Danny White threw a last-minute touchdown, just like Roger Staubach would have, to Drew Pearson, and they went on and they almost they went to I think 3 straight NFC title games, and Danny White couldn't get them over the hump in any of those. Yeah, it was. They lost in Philadelphia, then they lost in D.C., and I'm forgetting one. But anyhow, if they would have won any of those games and gone to a Super Bowl and won it, and they would have had lesser competition, they would have played the Bengals in one of those. They would have played the Raiders in one of those. If they would have won one, I think Danny White would have been a Hall of Famer.
Oh, interesting. Now, that's a big if. And I love your NFL. So that could be one of those that you could
that's exactly
fall right into that category.
Oh, absolutely.
What if, right?
Yeah, and by the way, children might be amazed to see that Danny White used to go back there and punt the ball. Like that, he was the Cowboys punter. And I
remember.
And also, you're the quarterback. That was weird.
Now, you're pulling all of this information off of what I call your hard drive just so fast. Have you always had that type of ability to remember certain plays, certain stats in sports? Because you're recalling it like you're a fan of that particular team.
Understand that that this brain is not clouded up by stuff like algebra or European literature.
You pushed that all out.
I don't have,
or did it ever get in there?
No. I didn't. I didn't want to risk it. Yeah. I didn't want to risk it. What if if I put the trigonometry in? Then it might push out the starting lineups for the Brewers and Cardinals in the '82 World Series, and I would not want to risk that.
And that's very valuable information.
Thank you.
You have to know that, right?
Gorman Thomas in center.
See, that's amazing. I'm jealous that you have that type of recall. I have trouble sometimes remembering if I just wash my hair when I'm in the shower. I can't remember.
No mistake. What's weird is I think a lot of people are plagued by this same thing. I can tell you what happened in 1984 much more easily than I can what happened yesterday. It's a weird thing. I can't. It's harder for me. I can tell you everything about the first 30 Super Bowls, but the last 22 or 23 or whatever there have been. See, I don't even know how many there have been since then. I would have a hard time ticking off in order who even played in those games off of memory, but I can tell you everything you need to know about the first 30 or so.
Yeah, well, because now, I mean, you got 4 kids, so
that's part of it.
That has a lot to do with it. I'm convinced that sucks a lot of stuff out of your hard drive.
That's right. What a sacrifice I've been willing to make is to spend some time with my children instead of seeing important sporting events. But I do it.
How many siblings did you grow up with?
2, an older sister and a younger sister. And my older sister, she was right there with me, more loyal to the Pittsburgh Penguins, even in their leanest of seasons, than I was, but always there with me in Three River Stadium. And remains a diehard. She lives in Pittsburgh and literally will go to Penguins playoff games by herself sometimes. She has 2 teenage sons. One of them is now in college, but sometimes if they don't want to go to the game,
she'll just go.
She just goes to the game, and I admire it.
Yes, of course. That's a true fan right there. Now, were you guys a competitive family, competing against each other?
I guess the main competition I had with my younger sister Debbie was who got who got control of the TV. This predates even remote controls. Once remote controls came, it got a little bit better, but then calling out like, I have the TV and I shall dictate what goes on for the next hour. She was not as much a sports fan, so that was a major rivalry all the way. And we always in the backyard. We had a smallish backyard. But in Pittsburgh weather, and especially come October and November, I remember always coming home from those Pitt football games that we talked about, and my friends and I would meet in the backyard and we would play 3-on-3 football in Shecker Memorial Stadium, and it was just like all the stadiums of that day, Three Rivers, the Vet, Riverfront. It was multi-purpose. It could be a football stadium in autumn and winter, but it also converted neatly into a wiffle ball backyard.
Quick conversion too, right?
It was that light reddish kind of brick back there, so we called it the Pink Monster. If you could hit it up onto the roof, you had cleared the Pink Monster. But yeah, we always were doing that around the house, and some fierce Monopoly games and everything else.
What about comedy in your family? I mean, you've got this unique combination of sports angle, but also a comedy angle. Was comedy something big in your family?
No, I've never dabbled in comedy or anything like that. But I mean, if
you've been trying.
No, well, I mean, I haven't been trying, I guess. No. So, yes, we really, my mother is really very funny. She probably is the biggest motivation for that. She's just been intrinsically kind of a funny person and remains that. I guess the big thing for me is that, I was never a tough guy, so you fall into one of those two kind of categories. I say even now in Los Angeles, there's so many people out here who are comedians or comedy writers and everything else, and I think the two major sides of that are that you're like me, you're self-esteem issues, and so your only choice is to push back and defend yourself in that way, or you're the BMOC and you always were pranking people and you were the king in high school of being a disruptor and everything else, and then that led you into comedy. Like I say, am on the former side of that, but really the inspiration for me was I remember right when we got a VCR, David Letterman was probably emerging as a late night force on NBC, and I remember I would set the VCR every night and wake up before I would go to school and watch Letterman every morning. And so, at a pretty early age, I was dyed in the wool, black and gold, through and through, and then Letterman and Cheers was another thing that I loved. That was a big one for me, and so yeah, those I guess would be my influences. I guess I was always kind of known.
Were you the class clown?
I guess so, yeah. I guess I was always kind of known.
Well, you don't seem like a guy that would have self-esteem issues at all. Did you struggle with?
Listen, I mean, I didn't speak outside of the aforementioned sisters and my mother. I didn't speak to a girl until I went to college. I mean, that was a foreign notion to me. Like, that they wouldn't want to speak to me, would they? No, I don't think I'm ready for that.
And why was that, though?
I have no. Maybe it goes back to the Steelers betraying me in the fashion that they did. Right. I thought I was something, then they knocked me down with Cliff Stout and Mark Malone and Bubby Brister.
Yeah. Well, that was a tough call for Bubby Brister to try to help your self-esteem.
Isn't that weird? Yeah, maybe that's a reach that I'm blaming my teenage troubles with girls on Bubby Brister. But I'm gonna go with that.
Go with that one. Yes, we'll go with that. Then, how do you make the transition of leaving Pittsburgh and then ultimately getting to California?
I was doing it. This is not an inspirational tale. It's just really dumb luck. I went to Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, at Bob Knight at the height of his powers. While I was there, Calbert Cheney, that gang, Damon Bailey, if you remember.
I do, yes. I'm a big basketball guy, so I know that team very well.
I'm still bitter about '93. In the all-time season of Titanic teams, you had Jamal Mashburn's Kentucky team, you had Eric Montrose and that
North
UNC
Carolina
team,
yeah.
You had the Fab Five. There were all these great teams, and still, head and shoulders above them all through the vast majority of the regular season were the Indiana Hoosiers. They had this iron six that they would roll with. They only had 6 guys, but they never would foul out. And then right before the tournament, Alan Henderson hurt his knee, and they couldn't sustain it without one of those key pieces. And they made it all the way to the final 8, but that's as far as they could go. I'm still bitter about that one. But But yeah, I did journalism in college and punctuated right at the end before I left school. I wrote Bob Knight a letter because, as you will recall, he liked to bash the media. So I wrote him a note, a cute note about how I want to show you before I leave our School of Journalism, Coach Knight, that Indiana University is producing a better brand of journalist for the next generation. If you have the chance, have the time for an interview, I'd love to sit down with you for a few minutes. And couldn't believe it. Called up a week later just to confirm that you got my letter, and the assistant, who infamously then became known to the public as the woman at whom he threw a potted plant in her office. A week later, I found myself in that office talking to her and saying, Coach Knight will see you down on the floor. Practice is wrapping up in about 15 minutes, so head on down to the floor at Assembly Hall, legendary Assembly Hall. I went down there. We set up. There was Calbert Chaney on one side. There was Damon Bailey on the other, finishing up practice, shooting their free throws. And we set up right in the middle of the floor. It was out of body kind of thing. And
kind of like me now.
Yeah,
with you, out of body.
Sure. Coach Knight, same. Coach Knight walked over with that walk that he has, a statuesque man. And inside of 2 questions, he had sworn at me and said, if you can get your S together by tomorrow, you can come back and we'll try this again. I asked him a pretty vanilla question about they were about to play Kansas, and I said they had lost to Kansas in the tournament the year before, and I said, any revenge factor as you go into this game? Is that something that's in the team's head? And that was the question that
set him off.
What kind of question is that? And he swore at me, and also he was cross because I brought a shooter with me, a camera, and the old kind of high 8 tapes, and he didn't expect. He thought I was just going to interview him, not on camera. So he was upset by that. And after he said, "You can come back tomorrow if you want. Also, I need that tape." And he took the tape and he walked off. And the shooter realized, wait, I have other stuff on that tape. We need to get that tape back. And so we went and knocked on the locker room door. And one of the trainer guys said, "Sorry, that tape's gone." Laughed, and the next day, it was legitimately, it was one of these things where, how he that was his big thing. I would challenge you and see if you rise to it. I was really kind of like, am I really now? I got yelled at and sworn at by Bob Knight, like a real media guy?
I was going to say, did you feel
cool
that you made it?
Or terrible? I couldn't, I was very conflicted, and I didn't know if I should even go back to reward that behavior. I would really send Coach Knight a lesson if I didn't show up the next day. But I did ultimately go back. And I asked him some super breezy questions, some softballs, and at the end he said, "Now that's how you do an interview." And as he turned to walk away, he said, "Oh wait, here's your tape back." And he gave the high 8 tape back. We went back to the school and put it into the player, and it didn't work at all. He had destroyed it, but he had his guys glue it back. He had some guys glue it back together. That, and the other thing, actually, as I'm thinking about it, the other big event for me, kind of that gave me a real appetite for it in a literal way, is I did an internship at KDKA where the Pirates play, on local television at the time. I did an internship there, and one day there was a Pirates game. One evening there was a Pirates game, so all the sports anchors were out at the stadium, and they got late word that Jack Nicklaus was flying in from Ohio to scout a golf course that he was designing. It was about 3/4 done, and he was going to fly in just to walk the course and see how it looked and everything. And they said, "We need somebody to go and do this." And I said, "I will definitely go and do that." And they sent me out with a shooter. I was, 19 or whatever I was, and just scratching out some questions. And I happened to have heard Payne Stewart. On a whim, I grabbed the newspaper with me as we left the TV station, because Payne Stewart had just said, because they were putting the Ryder Cup team together, and Payne Stewart had just said, "Well, Jack Nicklaus can't be on the team. He can't make 36 holes anymore. He said, he's great, but he's just too old for that anymore." And just on a whim, I said, I'll just in case, I'll bring that with me. And I found myself at this golf course with all the local anchors, Albie Oxenrider and guys like that, names that nationally you wouldn't know, but that made me very, much more than Jack Nicklaus even. I was, Albie Oxenrider's asking a question right now. I don't know how do you get in this gaggle or to ask the Golden Bear question. And so I did finally work up the courage to ask him a question, and I asked him about the Payne Stewart thing, and he said, "Oh, I didn't hear what that was." And I just happened to have the quote. I read it to him, and he gave a really good snarky response, like, "Well, see, when Payne Stewart wins as many majors as I have, tell him to get back to me about what I'm able to do and what I'm not able to do." Went back, took that back. That was news locally, and then the next morning on SportsCenter, I was over the moon. It still is one of the 3 or 4 biggest highlights of my career, is that you could see my hand holding the KDK mic flag, and it was national news. I made SportsCenter. Look at my hand. That's my hand.
You recognized your hand, didn't you?
Giving that snarky response in the nationwide. So that gave me a taste for doing it. And then just by dumb luck, I kind of just on a whim more than anything else, do I stay in Pittsburgh? Should I stay here? And this would be a fun life. And the Penguins were in the playoffs, and they were chasing their 3rd Stanley Cup. And I had my pals there, and we were talking about getting a 3-bedroom, and should we do that? And this would be a nice way to spend my 20s at least. And then also there was Chicago and another friend, and just sort of went, and legitimately true. While I'm having that conversation in Pittsburgh with those guys, my friend up in Chicago and I go up there for the weekend, and we look at some 2-bedroom apartments, and I'm kind of weighing what to do. And the Penguins had won 2 Stanley Cups in a row at that point, and they're playing for their 3rd straight that spring. And the New York Islanders upset the Penguins in Game 7 in overtime, and that's what made the decision for me. I thought, oh, the Penguins are out of the playoffs now. I got to go sign that lease in Chicago, and I did. And that really set off the dominoes that led me roundabout to eventually getting out to LA. And if I had it to do all over again, if I could have the Penguins win that overtime game, I would have, because I would have loved to have seen that 3rd Stanley Cup. But this has been a fine, fine way to figure it out.
Yeah, but now would you want them to win the Stanley Cup for the 3rd time just because you're a fan, or are you saying that because then that would have made you move to Pittsburgh?
No, because I would have just for them to win. 3, just to see 66 get a 3rd cup and solidify himself as the greatest in the sports history. But yeah, then I was in Chicago. I was doing sales and hating it, and I started dating a woman who eventually moved out to Los Angeles, and so for a year we did the cross country, flying back and forth every few weeks, and she eventually just said, "You hate what you do in Chicago. Why don't you just move out here?" And I said, "Well, to do what? What would I do in Los Angeles? How do you make your way?" It's the same thing I thought when I was 9 years old. Like, what do you do in LA? How would exactly. I'm not an actor or a director. How do you move there? Is that leave? What will I need to make this so? Like, same thing as if you moved to Detroit. Same rules apply here. So I eventually I said, she said, "Why don't you try being a comedy writer?" And I said, "What? I have no degree. I have no for that." And she said, "Who do you think has a degree in comedy writing? You just come out and you take your shot." And so I did, and I really got impossibly lucky from pretty much that point on. Just was a series of. Yeah,
when you say lucky, though, there had to be. I mean, you're a talented writer. So who's the first one to see your work and say, "All right, we're going to give you a shot"?
My first couple months out here, I got a job as a writer's assistant, which is hard to get, just with a guy who was a showrunner, a TV show runner, but he didn't have a show on the air, but he had a development deal. So basically, I was just his a glorified runner for him. Go get me coffee from my favorite coffee place, kind of thing.
Yeah,
for the first few months, and once in a while, he would write a pilot script, and I would have to type that sort of thing. That was basically what I did. And then I got a job writing trivia questions on Fox Sports on a show called Sports Geniuses. And I thought, walking in the door on the first day, this is ideal. I can't believe I've only been out here for 6 months and I already have a writing job, and this is the perfect thing for my resume, because I will dominate this writer's room, because it's a sports trivia show on cable. I've got to be the funniest guy in the room. They wanted it to be kind of funny. And within a half an hour, I realized I was doomed in the industry, because it was the guy who would go on to become Cousin Sal on Jimmy Kimmel Live and beyond in Fox Sports, and a couple of Kevin Hench, who has done a lot in comedy writing and in sports, and a couple other of the very funniest human beings I to this day I've ever known in my life, and I realized I'm the least funny guy in this room. Oh my God, what have I done? What kind of life is this?
How are you measuring that? Is it just your own perception and your opinion of that? Because like in sports, you can pretty quickly value one athlete versus the other because you can watch them, right?
Well, it's sort of like figure skating,
though, right?
Yeah, I guess it is like figure skating. Like, yeah, the just because the Russian judge likes it doesn't mean that the Belarus judge likes it. They can have their own set of opinions. I don't know how you gauge. I guess laughs. I don't know. You know, that would be it. So,
could you tell though? I mean, you just felt that these guys are really funny.
These guys
and
are
I don't feel like
funny.
I'm funny.
These guys are professionally funny. I love talking to people about what made you think that this was a good idea for you to move out here. Who told you were so funny that you should be out here? And in fact, you meet a lot of people. I'm obnoxious, and so that's funny adjacent. I'm a little bit bigger, I guess, in some ways, so that can trick people. But yeah, there's I marvel at some of the people that I come across that are in comedy, and like, who told you that this is something you should do? What happened in your head that you thought this would be a good idea for you to do this? And I say that to the man in the mirror more than I say it to anybody else. But yeah, then one day Sal invited me to watch football over at his house, and he said it's kind of weird. I live kind of in the basement of this house. So walk around the back, and I pulled up, these are in the early days of the Sunday ticket and all that kind of stuff. And I remember walking around the back of the house, and it was a really nice house. You know, we're whatever we were, 30 years old or something. I'm thinking, what is the setup here? And it was, in fact, and it was vaguely, I had a little deja vu, like, what is this room? I know this room from somewhere. And I sat down, and Kevin Hench, who I mentioned before, came along soon after. And about a half an hour later, Jimmy Kimmel walks into the room. Oh, Jimmy Kimmel's Sal's cousin. Oh, we're in Jimmy. I know this room because this is where Jimmy shoots his Fox pregame pick segment every every weekend on this couch. I'm sitting in a room with Jimmy Kimmel. What is happening right now? And then he couldn't have been lovelier. And then a little after that, Adam Carolla walked into the room, and Adam Carolla walked in, and legitimately, I'm here and Hench is here, and Sal and Jimmy are there. And like, hey, what's up, Jimmy? Good to see you. Hey, Sal. And Carolla sat down and did not speak to us. Spoke to the other two. Did not speak to me and Hench for the next 6 hours. And, much later, years later, I said, what was that about, by the way? I'd forgotten about that almost. Why did you do that? And he said, it's your probationary period. You should be grateful. You made it out clean on the other side. You passed the test. I don't have time to talk to everybody. If I try to engage everybody and get to know everybody, that wouldn't be satisfying for me. And there I came to understand the difference between two very funny guys. And by the end of that day, Kimmel said, hey, we're staffing up for the Man Show. You should submit a packet, and so I did, and the rest
you got it.
Is history. But like I say, dumb luck because Jimmy Kimmel happened to be a very generous guy and brought me on, and I went on to
you still had
Frank
to earn
Yankers and the Kimmel Show, the late night show, and everything else.
And so when you're working with all those guys and you're putting all the creative minds together and trying to come up with these skits, does it ever get personal in terms of if somebody doesn't think what you're writing is funny and you do?
It is. I mentioned earlier my complicated sense of self-esteem, and it really does play on that. On one hand, in fact, there's an old Kimmel Show bit that focused on not just that in the abstract. I'm talking about Dave Dameshek's complicated sense of self-esteem in this, because you would sit around that writer's table every day, very much like this, and whatever the subject of the day was, or subjects of the day, Octomom, what's everybody, let's go around the table, what's everybody's jokes on that? And everybody would have their 5-10 minutes to pitch around the table of 10 or so writers with Jimmy Kimmel seated at the head, writing it all down, and a writer's assistant at the other end duplicating that. And so it was a fairly daunting thing. These are some deeply funny human beings sitting around this table. So the first couple months it's out of body. There's you may not know the names, but some Tony Barbieri is one of the great talents of the 21st century, and Sal, like I mentioned, and Bill Simmons was there for the first couple of years, and so there are a lot of some fairly big personalities, and you would just pitch around that stuff, and I would half kiddingly would say sometimes, this is a guaranteed home run. This pitch is a guaranteed. I guarantee you this will get laughs. And then I also could always see the flaws in everything I pitched too. And Jimmy said that we're going to make this a bit. When you guarantee it's a home run, we're going to dress you up like a baseball player. Then you have to come out and do the bit. I'm not going to do it. You do the bit. And if it is a home run, you get to take a lap around the audience. And if it isn't, you have to hit the showers. And they had a shower set up on the stage, and I would have to take the shower. And of course, I was so excited in the moment that it didn't occur to me, this is cooked. There's no way I can win.
Exactly.
Of course, these people don't want to see me take a home run lap. They want to see me take the shower. So we did that a few times on the show, and I had to get doused with it.
Of course. Now, you mentioned this whole the NFL and the what ifs or whatever. What do you think this world or your life would be if the if was there's no sports?
I mean, in general, I say unironically all the time, what do people do who don't like sports? Because the greatest virtue of sports, a sports spectator, obviously not playing, there's a funny inverse relationship as you get to know athletes, you realize the better you are at sports, the less you care about how other people are at sports. And the worse you are at high levels of sports, the more you are engaged by what other people are doing. You like to watch that. But I really do think it's everything's about life. You need something to look forward to in the short term and the long term. And what are you going to do this weekend? Oh, I can't wait to see the U.S. Open this weekend. That's going to be great. Like, oh, we have tickets. We have 3.5 months from now. We're going to meet up at that college football game. Can't wait for that. What do you do without that? In the absence of that, like, TV shows, like, all right, kind of
Game of Thrones.
Well, that's a good one. That's a legit one. That's a legit one. But yes, there's only whatever handful of episodes left of that. But for me, I mean, I really don't know. I really don't know what I would do without sports. What would my life be right now? What if I hadn't moved out to LA? What would I do if I were down the middle? I mean, I remember the guy who I mentioned that when we moved to. Who I lived with in Chicago, a block north and a block east of Wrigley Field. We, for the first couple of years there, I mean, we went to, if we didn't go into Wrigley Field, we went to the Bleacher Bar right next to it and met friends there. There were 81 home games. We were there for at least 60 or 65 of those, drinking beers in the ballpark and everything. But I remember we would sit around and we would say, how do we manufacture a life that allows us, because there were several of us from Indiana University wound up in the north side of Chicago in the early mid-90s, and we would really contemplate exactly that. Like, how do we manufacture careers so that, because aren't we cheating life if we are doing something we like, and furthermore, if we're doing it with people that we like? And that, through dumb luck, it just wound up that I got to do both of those things. I mean, as immodest as it sounds, legitimately, it is dumb luck. I know that sounds like false immodesty, but legitimately, I grew up just die hard, living and dying with the Steelers and Pitt football and Pitt basketball and the Penguins, and once I got Mario Lemieux and all that kind of stuff. And when I wasn't doing that, I was watching David Letterman. The fact that I've gotten to write on a late-night TV show, and I've gotten, for the better part of a decade, to talk football and sports with you and with the people who call the games and the guys who play the games and everything else. It just feels impossibly lucky. I don't know what I would do without it. I'll be interested to see, because I'm sure I'll be doing it in about 18 months from now. It'll be fun to find out.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I agree with you in terms of I struggle with trying to understand what people have done that have never gravitated towards sports, just because it has meant so much to me, and not even just from an entertainment value perspective. I'm even talking just a life perspective where, I didn't know my biological father, and sports was my safe haven, my escape, and, where I first felt accepted, first felt camaraderie, team, love, just all of that. And I think so many people can miss out on a parallel of life through sports.
I completely agree with that, and so hopefully the younger generation plays team sports, because the thing that is interesting, and people hit me to the research about this, do you know the younger demo of football fans and sports fans don't care as much about team as they do about the individuals. People are much more about Odell Beckham than they are about the New York Giants and so on. Which is interesting, because and by the way, I wonder if that's in what chicken or the egg. That's actually I hadn't really considered it, but is that owed to the age of free agency, that those teams aren't tethered to one team for the most part in any of the major sports, or is it or is that the psychology or the sociology of people that makes it that way? Either way, I say all the time, one thing that perpetuates it is the jersey swap stuff. This is.
I know you do not like this.
It's a bane. It's a blight on sports. What are you doing? You're supposed to. I mean, WWE. We all love WWE. We all get why it's fun. Everybody gets that it's scripted, but why it's compelling is because they don't like each other. Conflict. This is conflict. When players from rivalries say, like, hey, good luck, hey, Russell Wilson, congratulations on that new deal. Like, wait a minute, you're in the 49ers, man. You can't be. No, we're all in a brotherhood, though. You don't understand. We're all in this business together. Like, yeah, it can't feel that way to the fans. You understand? We're willing to delude ourselves. You have to help us perpetuate that. You can't be congratulating the bitter rival who we were booing last Sunday.
Yeah, but now would the athletes, what if they came to you and said, well, wait a second, what about you and what you do in terms of your brotherhood of comedy writers versus NFL analysts or broadcasters or whatever? Do you root for them to have success?
When I was writing on the Kimmel Show, I was certainly not rooting for Jay Leno to put up big numbers. I can assure you of that. And by the way, besides that, anyway, do as I say, not as I do, please. I'm a hypocrite. The double standard applies, please.
You do have a standard to live up to, and it is being a hypocrite.
Yeah, I want everybody else to do that. This is, I'm vain. It's not, as I always say, I'm not a narcissist. I'm vain, and it's my vanity that requires your attention. That's the major difference between me, and I guess that kind of defines the two brands of comedy. You're either vain and want people to pay attention to you, or you're a narcissist and expect everybody should pay attention.
Yeah. Now, what about your family? Your kids right now, are they into sports as much as you were growing up? Because it's a little different living in Los Angeles.
My 12-year-old girl loves basketball, and she's a great athlete. My 10-year-old boy just started playing hockey, and he really enjoys that, which is a weird phenomenon in Southern California, that there is this rise of hockey. It's a funny thing that when teams in the NHL win the Stanley Cup, it tends to create a youth hockey kind of a thing. It's weird because that was true in Boston in the early to mid 70s with Bobby Orr and all of that. In Pittsburgh in the early 90s, and now Pittsburgh puts guys into the NHL, which is weird. And now it feels like LA is going to be one of those as well, because with the Kings winning Stanley Cups, there are a lot of rinks around here and youth hockey everywhere. So he's doing that, and then there is the 5-year-old and the 3-year-old, and it's too early to tell what their aptitude's going to be. But the 5-year-old boy looks like he's going to be a nice athlete at least.
Well, he's not going to follow in your footsteps then, huh?
No, I hope not. I heaven forbid. I fear that because this is being recorded, that somehow he'll hear about this at some point. But My 10-year-old boy, Jean-Claude Van Dameshek, he unfortunately got my foot speed, which is to say he got no foot speed.
He got none.
He got none.
Now, what about any words of wisdom that you're passing on to your kids? And that could be quotes, phrases, mottos, just life advice that has meant a lot to you.
Well, my old man, basically it comes down to, what every, I feel like I'm not certainly a theologian, but it seems like every religion arrives at the same point, which is basically be nice. Try to be nice to people in the same way you want them to be nice to you. That is an overarching one, but a little bit of a finer point on that, I always tell the story of my old man when he was a doctor and, in Pittsburgh, I went with him one day to the hospital, and not one but two, a janitor and a woman in the cafeteria pulled me aside. I didn't solicit them, I was a little kid. And they pulled me aside and they said, I just want you to know, your dad, of all the doctors, he's the only one who talks to us. He's the only one who treats us like we're people and that we're worth his time. And that means the world to me. And that was two people on the same day pulled me aside and said that. And it really is that the mark of a good person is how he or she treats those who can do nothing for him. That I think is a good one. Do I live up to that all the time? No, but it is a good target to shoot for.
Well, it obviously impacted you because you still remember it.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is obviously a big thing. Now,
I also, by the way, my new favorite one is at the kids' preschool, or the elementary school. The principal says every day at the start of the day on the PA system that broadcasts out all into the classrooms, says it's either a good day or a bad day. The choice is entirely up to you. I have no ability to do that, but if I could give my children anything, it would be the ability to decide to make their
now,
lives.
Why don't you have that ability?
It's not in me. I don't know why. I don't.
Are you a pessimistic person?
Yeah. Mostly, yeah. But my worldview changes a little bit through my children. But I'm able, in little ways, I'm able to enjoy movies like The Last Jedi. I would have hated that movie, but then they enjoyed it, and I saw it with them, and so then I was able to say, yeah, it was fun. Because little things like that, I can lighten up because of that. Because
it's a completely different experience with them. Well, Dave, I can't thank you enough for spending time with me. I know you have another 2.5-hour drive back home.
But what a pleasure, just the same. Now, what we need to do is, we need Act 4, Cowboys-Steelers. What would be better than Dak v. Big Ben for all the marbles? We were deprived back in Super Bowl 14. We started there. Super Bowl 14, Billy Waddy and the Rams, Vince Ferragamo, impossibly went into Texas Stadium.
I remember it well.
On a deflected pass with 90 seconds left, Billy Waddy, in one of the craziest plays you'll see, over the middle, and the Cowboys DB, I believe, gets his hand on it and travels another 15 yards, and Billy Waddy's just running in full stride and catches it and runs it into the end zone, which gave us the worst title game, bar none, in the Super Bowl era. Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting the LA Rams. Final score 9-0. LA Rams on 3 Frank Corral field goals. Fat Frank Corral kicks 3 field goals to face the mighty Pittsburgh Steelers. That is one. Talk about what if and the football gods and all that. They deprived us of what would have been, an epic round 3. Imagine that would have been their 3rd Super Bowl in 5 years against each other.
Would have been amazing.
That would have been great. And then we did get Super Bowl 30. And
the problem, though, I don't see anything happening for the Cowboys. Not under the regime that they have right now. They're not going to make a Super Bowl run. They're just not.
It's funny because I've been thinking about that what if specifically, and you can calculate a path where had the Jags not taken Leonard Fournette at number 4 in the 2017 draft and instead taken either Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes, whichever guy you like, that the Jags would have beaten the Patriots in Foxborough in that AFC title game 2 Januaries ago. So then they would have played the Eagles, and that's how that one would have shook out. But the Cowboys, I'm trying to think of how this impacts the Cowboys. It does impact them somehow. Yes, Nick Foles then would have accepted the trade after that Super Bowl when the Texans didn't get Deshaun Watson. They would have been desperate for
They would have needed a
So
quarterback.
they would have said, hey, Philly, can we get Nick Foles from you? Now, Foles turned down a trade to Cleveland, but that was Cleveland.
That's right.
Nick Foles would have wanted to
Houston.
go to Texas. He would have his home state. He would have gone back to Texas. He would have been the Texans QB. This means that Nick Foles wouldn't have been in against the Bears in last year's playoffs, which means the Bears would have won, and then the Cowboys would have played in New Orleans in the divisional round, and they already had beaten the Saints once. Those things tend to repeat themselves. It doesn't tend to go the other way. It tends to repeat. So the Cowboys would have beaten the Saints. You might have gone to the Super Bowl, because then it would have been. Then you would have had Cowboys, because the Bears would have beaten the Rams just like they did earlier in the year. So your title game would have been Cowboys and the Bears. Cowboys up in Chicago. How do you beat that defense? You run on them. Who could run on them better than Zeke? Ergo, it would have been America's team, allegedly, against
Why
the
can't
Patriots.
you just write that for us and make that happen?
I did one better. We just talked it through. We just talked it into being.
Yes, we did. All right, well, I'm going to hold you to that. We need to somehow now have you be able to write the future script that the Cowboys can, because I just don't see it happening, unfortunately.
When you can imbue me with those powers, that is the next step. The next step.
That's the next step for you?
That when I imagine something, that it then comes to pass. That's what we need to do.
I'm going to hold you to it. Okay. Dave, thank you.
Thanks, pal. It was good times.
It's fantastic. Greatly appreciate it.